Baek Do-hyun only agreed to cover the blind date for his friend because he was bored. But the moment he sat across from the quiet black student, something unexpected happened. Cassia did not fear him. She did not try to impress him. She simply smiled like he was an ordinary man. What he did not know was that the woman sitting across from him had spent the last 6 months secretly investigating the Korean Mafia. And the man she was slowly falling for was the one name at the very top of her list. If you are hooked already, hit that like button right now and drop your country in the comments. We have viewers watching from all over the world and we want to see where you are tuning in from. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from us. The reservation was under the name Park Sung-il. Baek Do-hyun had agreed to cover it the way he handled most things in his life, completely without half measures, and without making a production of the effort involved. Sung-il had called at noon, voice tight with the specific panic of a man who had been carefully building towards something and watched it collapse at the last possible moment. A flight delay out of Tokyo. A reservation at Jumsil he could not cancel without looking careless. A woman he had been talking to for 3 weeks who deserved better than a no-show and an empty table. Just go, Sung-il had said. Explain what happened. Apologize on my behalf. Have dinner. She is a graduate student, Do-hyun. She is kind and she is alone in this city, and I do not want her sitting at that table feeling invisible. Just make sure she does not feel stood up. Baek Do-hyun had been quiet on the line for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me the reservation details," and ended the call without waiting for the gratitude he knew was coming. He was the head of the Baek syndicate. He controlled 4 districts of Seoul's criminal underground, 2 legitimate import companies that moved considerable money through verifiable channels, and the absolute loyalty of over 300 men who would do whatever he asked without requiring a reason or an explanation. His name was spoken carefully in certain circles and not spoken at all in others. Rooms changed when he entered them. Decisions changed. The temperature of any space he occupied shifted in ways that people felt before they consciously registered why. He had not done something as ordinary as a dinner date in years. Possibly ever, in the way that normal people understood the concept, as something unscripted and open-ended without an agenda underneath it. But Sung-il was his oldest friend, the one person on earth who had known him before the empire and still spoke to him like a human being rather than a force of nature. And Monday had been suffocating. His lieutenants had spent 6 consecutive days locked in a territorial argument about the Mapo district boundaries, and the walls of his office had begun pressing inward in a way he refused to acknowledge but could not entirely ignore. A quiet restaurant in a stranger's honest company sounded, if nothing else, like breathing room. So he went. He arrived 12 minutes early. He always arrived early. He chose the corner table without conscious thought. Back to the wall, clear sightlines to the main entrance and the side corridor leading to the kitchen. His driver stayed with the car on the street outside. His shadow, a quiet and exceptionally capable man named Woo-sik who had worked beside him for 9 years, settled into a table 2 positions away with a menu he had no intention of reading. Baek Do-hyun ordered whiskey, checked his phone twice for messages that did not require his immediate attention, then set it face down on the white tablecloth and made himself be still. He was excellent at stillness. It was one of the most effective weapons he had ever developed. The ability to be absolutely motionless and unreadable in any situation while his mind moved at full speed behind his eyes. It made men nervous. It made negotiations tilt in his direction before a single word was spoken. He sat with that stillness now and waited. The door opened at 7 minutes past the reservation time. She did not rush. That was the first thing he noticed, and it caught him in a way that very few things did anymore because it was so completely contrary to what he expected. People who were running late always rushed. They came through doors already apologizing, eyes scanning the room frantically, slightly breathless, carrying the energy of someone who felt they owed the world an explanation for their imperfection. It was a near-universal human reflex, the performance of remorse for inconveniencing others. This woman did not perform anything. She walked in at her own pace, unhurried and completely self-possessed, as though she had decided long ago at exactly what speed she intended to move through the world and had revisited that decision enough times to be completely at peace with it. There was no apology in her posture, no anxiety, simply a woman arriving somewhere she had chosen to be. She was wearing yellow, a warm soft shade that did something extraordinary against her deep brown skin under the restaurant's amber evening lighting, making her glow in a way that was not dramatic but was completely impossible to look away from. She was curvy in the way of a woman entirely comfortable with how she was built, nothing performed about it, nothing self-conscious or apologetic in how she carried herself. Her hair was gathered up loosely with a few natural coils escaping at her temples and brushing her jaw. She carried a small structured bag over one shoulder, and a worn leather notebook tucked under her arm with the ease of something she carried everywhere without thinking about it. She scanned the room once, found the table, walked toward it without hesitation. She sat down across from him, placed her notebook on the edge of the table, smoothed the front of her dress once, and looked at him with eyes that were calm and direct and entirely unimpressed. "You are not Park Sung-il," she said. Not a question. Not an accusation. Simply an observation delivered with the same composure she had walked in with, as though unexpected developments were things she noted and processed rather than reacted to. "No," he said. "I am not." His friend. "Yes." She nodded, the particular nod of someone who is genuinely integrating information rather than simply performing the gesture of understanding. Then she reached for the menu and opened it. "Is he all right?" she asked. Baek Do-hyun paused. He had prepared a short polished explanation. He had not prepared for her first question, before any expression of inconvenience or disappointment, to be about the well-being of a man she had never met. "Flight delay out of Tokyo," he said. "He sends his apologies." "That is unfortunate." She was reading the menu with genuine focused interest, the way people read things they actually want to understand. "I have been meaning to try the black cod here for 4 months. I walk past this restaurant every Tuesday evening on my way back from the library." "Order it," he said. She looked up at him over the top of the menu with those direct eyes. "I intend to," she said. Something shifted in his chest. It was small and quiet and arrived without warning, and he had absolutely no framework for it. "Baek Do-hyun," he said, offering only his name. No titles. No professional context. No weight. Just the name itself, stripped of everything that usually traveled with it. She held his gaze for a steady, unhurried beat. "Cassia Blake." The waiter arrived. She ordered the black cod and sparkling water with the ease of a woman who had long ago stopped performing hesitation or uncertainty in public spaces because she had decided neither served her. He ordered another whiskey. Dinner began. The thing that unsettled him most was how completely unbothered she was. Baek Do-hyun understood his own effect on people with the same clarity and absence of vanity with which he understood most things about the world. It was not something he cultivated for its own sake. It was simply a consistent observable fact. Men adjusted their posture and the volume of their voices when he entered rooms. Women responded to him in one of two predictable patterns, either with the kind of deliberate interest that had an agenda underneath it, or with careful measured distance that communicated respect and awareness of his position. Everyone registered on some level that he was not ordinary. Power displaced air differently and people felt it before their conscious minds had time to explain what they were feeling. Cassia Blake passed him the bread basket and asked whether he generally preferred window seats or corner seats when he ate out. "Corner," he said. "Me too." She tore a small piece of bread with neat unhurried fingers. "Better sight lines. I like knowing where everyone in a room is." He studied her with real interest. "That is an unusual preference for a graduate student." I am an unusual graduate student. She said it without pride or performance, simply as a statement of observable fact. I grew up moving constantly. London for secondary school, Lagos before that, Atlanta before that. When you change cities often enough, you either learn to read rooms very quickly, or you spend a great deal of your life being caught off guard by things you could have seen coming. You do not seem like someone who gets caught off guard easily. She considered that genuinely, giving the observation the weight of a question that deserved a real answer rather than a reflexive deflection. I used to, she said. I worked on it for a long time. He watched her eat. She did so with real visible enjoyment, completely unself-conscious about it, not performing restraint or delicacy the way he had observed many people do in restaurants at this particular price point, as though appetite itself was something that required management in public. She simply ate the food she had been wanting to try for 4 months, and found it satisfying and let that show on her face without editing it. She was entirely, uncomplicatedly present. It was one of the most disarming things he had ever encountered in a person. You ask questions like someone who is used to people answering them, she said, without looking up from her plate. He went very still. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without particular agenda, as though she had noticed something true about him and saw no compelling reason not to name it out loud. But it landed with a precision that went far deeper than she knew, because it was accurate in both the obvious sense and in every sense beneath that. Most people do answer, he said, keeping his voice careful and even. I imagine they do. She glanced up briefly with something quiet and thoughtful moving behind her eyes. What do you do, Baek Do-hyun? Import and export, he said. The answer: his legitimate businesses provided for exactly these situations. Clean, unremarkable, accurate enough on its surface to be completely unmemorable. Sung-il described you as the most dependable person he had ever met, she said, reaching for her sparkling water. That is an interesting way to describe someone in business. Most people in business lead with impressive or successful. Dependable means something different. It means people actually count on you. He looked at her across the candlelight. Does that surprise you? No, she said simply. You seem like someone who finishes what he starts. The observation settled between them, and he let it sit there without deflecting it. And you? He said. What does your research focus on? Organized crime structures in urban Korea. She said it with the complete ease of someone entirely at peace with their field and unbothered by the reactions it sometimes produced. Graduate thesis research. I am specifically mapping how criminal networks in Seoul sustain themselves through legitimate economic integration. How they construct internal systems that mirror corporate hierarchies so precisely that from the outside they become functionally indistinguishable from legal enterprise. The financing mechanisms, the loyalty structures, the way informal governance fills institutional gaps. The whiskey glass in his hand did not move. His face did not change. 34 years of absolute practice control meant his surface stayed perfectly smooth while everything underneath it went completely, carefully, irrevocably still. Fascinating field, he said. It is endlessly fascinating. The warmth that entered her voice was involuntary and completely genuine. The specific warmth of someone speaking about work they love deeply and chose deliberately. Most people assume it is grim, and parts of it are. But the structures themselves are genuinely remarkable. The economic architecture, the way trust functions as a currency, the parallels with legitimate organizational theory, that the academic world has historically been reluctant to examine too directly. She paused and met his eyes. I am sorry. I tend to go on when someone actually asks. Do not apologize, he said quietly. She looked at him then, a real look, sustained and direct, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression, as though she had arrived prepared for polite tolerance and found something else entirely sitting across from her. He held her gaze and let her find whatever she was looking for. By the time the dessert menus arrived, they had been talking for 2 hours and 12 minutes. He had told her nothing true about himself, and she had told him everything true about herself. 26 years old, 3 years into her graduate program at Yonsei on a full research scholarship that covered tuition and left everything else to careful management. No family in Korea. A best friend named Yemi in London she called without fail every Sunday morning. 14 months in Seoul, during which she had learned enough Korean to navigate daily life with confidence, but still occasionally woke from dreams speaking English, and needed a moment to remember which city held her. She told him these things not because she was careless with herself but because she was honest, and she had long ago decided that honesty was not the same thing as vulnerability. There was an important difference and she lived it completely. He drove home in absolute silence and thought about her for the entire 40-minute journey without once deciding to stop. He told himself it was a complication requiring assessment. That was how Baek Do-hyun processed everything that fell outside his expected operational parameters. With calm, systematic attention, he identified the variable, measured its potential impact against existing interests, and determined the appropriate and proportional response. It was the discipline that had built his empire. It was what had kept him alive and solvent, and in control for over a decade, in a world that treated sentiment as the most exploitable weakness a man could carry. Cassia Blake was a variable. She was a graduate researcher mapping organized crime in urban Seoul, with what was clearly considerable academic sophistication. She was doing this without knowing that she had spent 2 hours at Jumsil discussing the structural mechanics of criminal enterprises with the man who ran the most precisely constructed one in the city. The irony was so exact it felt less like coincidence and more like something a very creative and somewhat cruel universe had arranged deliberately. The appropriate response was straightforward. File the encounter. Take no further action. Allow Sung-il to apologize properly on his return, and permit the entire evening to dissolve into irrelevance. He had reached that decision cleanly by the time he arrived home. He reversed it before his coffee finished brewing the following morning. He called Do-young, his information officer, a meticulous and discreet man who had never once asked an unnecessary question in 7 years of service, and gave him Cassia Blake's name and university affiliation. The report came back in 4 hours. Cassia Blake, 26, British-Nigerian national, graduate researcher, Department of Sociology and Criminology, Yonsei University. Full international scholarship 3rd year. Research supervisor, Professor Lim Hae-won. Thesis title, Shadow Economies and Legitimate Facades. A structural analysis of organized crime networks in Seoul's urban districts. He read the thesis title twice, then a third time. She was not studying organized crime as a broad theoretical framework. She was studying Seoul. Specifically, she was mapping the exact districts his operations moved through. She was tracing the precise economic integration strategies his financial architects had spent years perfecting. She was building, with the patient methodical precision of someone who genuinely knew what she was doing, an academic portrait of the world he had constructed. He should have felt alarm. He should have immediately initiated containment measures. He should have done any number of cold strategic things that the situation technically called for. He sat with the report for a very long time. What he felt was not alarm. It was something that lived in a neighborhood much closer to wonder, which was a feeling so foreign to him at this stage of his life that it took him genuinely several minutes to correctly identify it. She was remarkable. That was the simple, unembellished truth of it, assessed as cleanly as he assessed anything else. A remarkable mind, a remarkable self-possession, remarkable in the specific way of someone who had decided exactly who they were and moved through the world from that center without deviation or apology. He picked up his phone and called Sung-il. "How did it go?" Sung-il asked, guilt evident even through the phone. "She was not stood up," Baek Do-hyun said. She handled the situation with complete composure. Was she upset with me? Her first question was whether you were all right. Sung-il was quiet for a moment. I told you she was kind. Yes, Baek Do-hyun said. You did. A longer pause stretched between them. Do-hyun, Sung-il said finally, slowly, with the particular caution of a man navigating something carefully. What is in your voice right now? Nothing. There is something. You have a specific tone when you have already decided to do something, and you are running the justifications. Baek Do-hyun ended the call. 3 days later he walked into the campus coffee shop nearest to Yonsei University's sociology building at 10 in the morning. He had a legitimate meeting 4 blocks away at 10:30. The route was entirely reasonable. He was simply arriving early in a nearby establishment. It meant nothing at all. He ordered an Americano, chose the corner table with clear sight lines to the entrance, and sat with his phone and a patience that had absolutely nothing to do with waiting for any specific person. She walked in at 10:47. Burgundy oversized sweater, dark jeans, white sneakers with a small scuff on the left toe. Her hair was loose today. A full magnificent crown of natural coils that framed her face and made her look simultaneously softer in appearance and more formidable in presence. The leather notebook was under her arm as expected. She was already reading something on her phone as she joined the queue. One thumb scrolling slowly, her lips moving slightly as she processed whatever she was reading. She reached the counter, ordered without looking up from her screen, paid, turned to scan for a seat. She saw him. She went still for exactly 2 seconds. He watched something move across her face, something genuine that she brought under control quickly and efficiently, and then she walked over to his table. Baek Do-hyun, she said. Cassia Blake, he said. She looked at the empty chair across from him, then back at him with those perceptive eyes. Do you have meetings in this neighborhood regularly? I had one nearby this morning, he said. Completely true. Completely insufficient as a full explanation. She studied him for a moment in the particular way she had, reading something in him that he was not entirely comfortable with her being able to read. Then she pulled out the chair and sat down. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. About her current chapter draft, about Seoul in winter versus Seoul in summer, about a documentary on economic migration that had kept her awake until 2 in the morning, because one segment had restructured something she thought she already understood about informal financial systems. He asked her questions and she answered them with the same unguarded honesty she had brought to dinner 3 days ago. And he sat across from her in a university neighborhood coffee shop experiencing something he had genuinely no adequate framework to process. She made him feel like an ordinary man, not diminished, not stripped of power or presence, simply a person sitting across from another person, having a conversation that carried weight for no strategic reason whatsoever, and finding it to be the most genuinely interesting hour and 20 minutes he had spent in longer than he could accurately measure. When she finally stood to leave, she gave him that slight considering look. Is it likely that you will have meetings in this neighborhood again soon? She asked. It is possible, he said. Something moved at the very corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make the space behind his sternum do something it had no business doing. Goodbye, Baek Do-hyun, she said. He watched her walk out into the pale cold Seoul morning, her natural hair catching the winter light, notebook pressed against her chest, and he remained very still for a long moment after the door swung closed behind her. Then he picked up his phone and canceled every remaining appointment in his afternoon. He started watching over her without ever calling it what it was. He assigned Woo-sik to maintain a quiet, completely unobtrusive security presence on her daily route between campus and her apartment. Nothing visible. Nothing that would frighten her or draw attention from anyone watching. Simply reliable eyes reporting back consistently. He gave himself the strategic justification that she was researching his world without knowing it, that understanding her proximity to sensitive information was simply prudent operational management. The justification was not entirely false. What was also true, and what he did not examine directly, was that the image of her walking alone across Seoul at night, an international student with no family in the city and a research focus that made her a potential target in ways she was completely unaware of, had settled into his chest like a splinter he could not locate but could feel continuously. The first detailed report from Woo-sik arrived on a Thursday evening. She left campus at 6:30 carrying her notebook and a library book. She stopped at a small market on Sinchinaro and moved through the aisles with the careful, deliberate attention of someone operating within a precise budget. She checked prices. She put one item back on the shelf. She chose a smaller package of something else. She paid in cash and counted the change before pocketing it. She walked home in 22 minutes at her characteristic unhurried pace. She cooked in her apartment. Her lights went out at 11:50. Baek Do-hyun read that report at his desk in his office, surrounded by the controlled, expensive quiet of a building that existed entirely on the architecture of his authority, and felt something move through him that had absolutely no place in that room. He sat with it for a moment. Then he called Do-young. "Find out who administers the supplementary research grant funds for international graduate students in Yonsei's criminology department," he said. "Specifically, what mechanisms exist for anonymous donor contributions designated toward advanced thesis research." Do-young said, "Yes, sir," and ended the call without a single unnecessary word. By the following Monday morning, an anonymous research grant of 3 million won had been quietly designated and processed through the Yonsei University International Graduate Research Fund, specifically earmarked for third-year thesis candidates in the criminology and sociology department. There was one third-year thesis candidate in that department. He told himself it was logical. A researcher of her caliber and the seriousness of her work should not be checking grocery prices and returning items to shelves. It was simply a practical correction of an inefficient situation. It had nothing meaningful to do with a specific image of her hand setting something back on the shelf. He maintained that position for approximately 3 days. The following week, Woo-sik sent a brief text. Her laptop screen had been cracking at the corner. A new one had arrived at the International Student Administrative Office, addressed to her from the Anonymous Research Fund. She stood in the office for a long time before she accepted it. Baek Do-hyun read that single line sitting in the back of his car between meetings and felt the thing in his chest that he had been carefully not naming become significantly harder to continue not naming. He looked out the window at the city moving past and understood, with the same clarity he brought to every other important decision in his life, that he was in very serious trouble. He is protecting her in secret, funding her research anonymously, and burning with jealousy over a man he has no claim on. And she still has no idea who he really is. If this story has you hooked, hit that like button and drop your country in the comments. Share this with someone who loves a good love story and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on because the story is not over yet and everything is about to change. His name was Daniel Ben. Baek Do-hyun learned about him on a Wednesday when he arrived at the coffee shop and found Cassia already seated, not alone, but across from a tall, easy-smiling man who was leaning forward with his elbows on the table laughing at something she had just said. And she was laughing back, her whole face open and unguarded in a way that did something cold and precise to the space behind Baek Do-hyun's ribs. He stood at the entrance for 3 seconds. Then he walked to the counter, ordered his Americano and took a different table. Not far enough to be pointed. Not close enough to be obvious. Precisely the distance of a man telling himself he had no claim on anyone, and therefore no logical reason to feel the very specific controlled fury currently moving through him like a current he was actively containing. He opened a report on his phone. He did not read a single word of it. Across the room, Daniel was watching Cassia with an expression Baek Do-hyun recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone who had already decided he wanted something and was simply working out the timing of asking for it. Baek Do-hyun understood that look in a general sense. He had never particularly wanted to understand it while watching it directed at this specific woman. His jaw tightened. When Cassia finally looked up and noticed him across the room, something moved in her expression. She said something brief to Daniel, then stood and walked over. "You did not come to say hello," she said. "You had company," he said. His voice was perfectly even. She studied him. "His name is Daniel. He is a friend from the International Student Association." "I did not ask," Baek Do-hyun said. "No," she said quietly. "You did not." She held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Daniel left 10 minutes later. Neither of them said anything about what had just passed between them, but it sat in the air, warm and unaddressed and completely impossible to pretend was nothing. That evening he told Woo-sik to run a full background check on Daniel Ben. The report came back clean the following morning. Second-year graduate candidate in economics. No concerning associations. By every measurable standard, a completely harmless person. Baek Do-hyun read the report, set it down, and felt absolutely no relief. The warning came on a Friday afternoon. His second lieutenant, a sharp and loyal man named Cha Sang-hyun, came to him with a particular expression he reserved for news he would have preferred not to deliver. "The Seoul faction has been asking questions," Sang-hyun said carefully, "about your recent movements in the Sinchon area. Multiple visits over 3 weeks. They have noted the pattern and are speculating about whether you are establishing new operational interests in that district." He paused. "There is also a secondary rumor forming that the visits are personal." The office was very still. "Who is generating the rumor?" Baek Do-hyun said. "We are working to identify the source." "Work faster." He moved to the window and looked out over the city with the calm that people in his world had learned to fear more than open anger. "What is the CO faction's current posture?" "Watchful. Not yet aggressive. But their new leadership is younger. Less patient with established boundaries. More interested in finding ways to demonstrate capability. New leadership with something to prove. Looking for leverage. Looking for the place where the most controlled man in Seoul had quietly been leaving himself open." Baek Do-hyun had known from the first Tuesday he walked into that coffee shop that this moment was a possibility. He had weighed it and kept walking through the door anyway. "Increase surveillance on the Sinchon district immediately," he said. "Full visibility on CO faction movements in that area." "And Sang-hyun." His voice dropped. "Double the detail on the civilian. Completely undetected. If anyone outside our operation has eyes on her, I want to know before she takes her next step." Sang-hyun nodded. Then carefully, "Sir, the exposure risk here is significant." "Noted," Baek Do-hyun said. "Dismissed." He stood alone at the window after Sang-hyun left and thought about a woman in a yellow dress walking into a restaurant without rushing. He thought about the way she said his full name every single time, like she had decided it deserved the complete pronunciation. He thought about a laptop accepted after a long hesitation in an administrative office. Then he thought about leverage. About the brutal arithmetic of a world where caring about something made it a target. He picked up his phone. "Everything tightens starting now," he told Woo-sik. "I want to know if anyone else is watching her before she has any reason to know it herself." The document was in a public financial registry. Cassia had been cross-referencing legitimate business registrations across 3 of Seoul's commercial districts against the ownership patterns she had been building for months. It was slow, painstaking work requiring patience and a particular pattern recognition she had spent 3 years developing deliberately. She found the thread on a Tuesday night at 11:30. A holding company registered under the name Baek Do-hyun Capital Group. Layered beneath clean subsidiary registrations connecting to 4 legitimate business fronts she had already flagged across 2 districts. The structure was elegant, genuinely elegant, built by someone who understood both financial architecture and the specific blind spots in how regulators reviewed ownership chains. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she pulled up her district mapping notes and looked at the registered address. Her pen stopped moving. Baek Do-hyun Capital Group. The thought arrived quietly, without drama, the way the most devastating realizations sometimes did. Not as an explosion but as a slow, heavy settling of weight. She sat completely still for a full minute and let it land. She thought about dinner at Jumsil. Import and export, he had said. She thought about how he always chose corner tables. How he arrived early. How he asked questions with the ease of someone for whom answers were simply expected. She thought about the coffee shop visits with their conveniently nearby meetings. She thought about a research grant that appeared from nowhere and a laptop addressed to her from an anonymous fund. She thought about the way he had looked at her that first night, that single unguarded fraction of a moment before his composure sealed completely shut again. She closed her laptop carefully. She sat in the quiet of her small apartment for a very long time. Then she pressed her palms flat on the desk, breathed in slowly, and felt the full weight of what it meant to have been falling, gradually and against every sensible instinct, for the precise man her entire life's work was built to expose. She did not sleep that night. She found him at the coffee shop on Thursday morning. He was already there. Corner table. Americano. Phone face down. He looked up when she walked in and she watched that involuntary thing move across his face that always happened when he first saw her. That small shift he had never fully learned to suppress in her presence. She walked directly to his table and sat down. She opened her notebook to the page she had spent 2 nights preparing and placed it between them. A dense page of precise handwriting. A structural diagram connecting company names and registration numbers and district addresses laid out with the clarity of someone who knew exactly what they had found. She watched his eyes move across the page. She watched his face remain completely still. Baek Do-hyun Capital Group, she said. Her voice was steady. She had worked on that through an entire sleepless night. For subsidiary connections to legitimate business fronts across 2 districts, I have been mapping for 8 months. She looked at him directly. You. The coffee shop moved around them completely undisturbed. Soft music. Steam from the espresso machine. 2 students arguing cheerfully near the door about something entirely ordinary. He looked at her. He did not deny it. That was what cracked something open in her chest. Not the confirmation itself, which she had already survived alone 2 nights ago. It was the fact that he simply looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and did not once attempt to insult her intelligence. He gave her the truth the only way he apparently knew how to give anything, completely without flinching. Did you enjoy it? Her voice stayed level through real effort. Sitting across from me while I talked about my research, knowing exactly what you were. No, he said quietly. Then what was it? Were you monitoring me? Watching how close I was getting? At first, yes, he said. You were researching my world. I needed to understand your proximity to anything sensitive. That was the reason I came the first time. And after the first time? He held her gaze. You know the answer. I want you to say it. Something moved across his face that looked remarkably like pain. After the first time, he said quietly, I came back because I could not find a single convincing reason not to. And I stopped looking for one. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, picked up her notebook, and walked out into the cold Seoul morning without looking back. She cried briefly in the stairwell of her campus building. Then she dried her face, lifted her chin, and went to her morning seminar. She was, after all, an unusual graduate student. She had been avoiding him for 6 days when everything changed. It was late on a Wednesday night. Her seminar had run over and she was walking her usual route home when a black vehicle pulled alongside her, and 2 men stepped out with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before. She did not have time to run. Woo-sik's call came through to Baek Do-hyun at 2 in the morning. He was awake. He had been awake most nights that week. "Sir." Woo-sik's voice was clipped. "The Seoul faction has moved on her. 2 vehicles tracked from campus. She is no longer on the route." Every other thought dissolved instantly. "Where?" he said. He was already moving. "Mapo District. Warehouse area. She is unharmed as of the last confirmed visual. They have not reached the secondary location." He drove with a coldness that had nothing to do with composure, and everything to do with the absolute focused certainty of a man who had made a decision so complete it left no room for anything else. Sang-hyun called. "Moving on the Seo faction directly escalates to full conflict." "Then it escalates," Baek Do-hyun said simply. They found her vehicle stopped at a junction in Mapo 11 minutes later. The Seo faction had not anticipated that the man they had chosen to pressure would have a team already in motion before they reached their destination. Baek Do-hyun pulled the door open himself. Cassia was inside with her wrists bound and a blindfold she had been methodically working to loosen from the moment it was tied. When it came free and she saw him standing in the open doorway with the cold Seoul night behind him, she went completely still. He looked at her. Something in his chest that had been wound impossibly tight for 11 minutes released all at once. "You are safe," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She looked at him for a long unsteady moment. And then, because she was Cassia Blake and she had spent her entire life refusing to be fragile in front of anyone, she lifted her chin and said, "I had almost gotten the blindfold off myself." He cut the ties from her wrists and wrapped his coat around her shoulders in a single motion. She did not pull away. He took her to a safe house in a quiet part of the city. She sat on a wide sofa with his coat still around her shoulders and a cup of tea warming her hands and did not speak for a long time. He sat across from her and let the silence be what it needed to be. He did not fill it. He simply stayed. Eventually she looked up at him. "Are you going to tell me I am safe now and send me back to my apartment?" she said. "No," he said. "Are you going to disappear back into your world and pretend none of this was real?" "No." She studied him quietly. "Then what?" He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her with everything he had spent months carefully managing now fully visible on his face. "I covered a blind date for my oldest friend because I had nothing better to do on a Monday evening," he said. "You walked into that restaurant in a yellow dress and sat down across from me like I was an ordinary man and said my name like it deserved to be said in full." He paused. "I have not been the same since that night. I do not want to be." Cassia looked at him for a long time without speaking. "I hate what your world does to people," she said finally. "I have spent 3 years documenting it." "I know," he said. "You told me the night we met. I have thought about it every day since." "What does that mean?" "It means I am done with the violent side of it. Sang-hyun takes operational leadership. The import companies remain. The rest ends." He held her gaze. "I have been building toward this for 2 years. I had no reason to move faster until you." She was quiet for a moment. "I am not a reason for you to dismantle your life." "No," he said. "You are a reason to build a different one." Something worked through her then, some deep internal negotiation between the part of her that was afraid and the part that had been fighting this feeling for months and losing every single time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright but her voice was steady. "I submitted my thesis last week," she said quietly. He looked at her. "All of it. All of it. Submitted for review." A small pause. "Your company structure is in chapter 4. Something close to a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "I know. I read it." She stared at him. "You read it?" 2 days ago. "It is the most precise and devastating piece of research I have encountered in my professional life." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, sudden and completely unguarded. And it was the most beautiful thing he had heard in 34 years. The space between them closed the rest of the way quietly and completely. She did not pull away. He stayed. 3 months later Seoul was warmer. The Seo faction had been handled with the decisive thoroughness Baek Do-hyun brought to every problem he considered genuinely worth his full attention. Sang-hyun had taken operational leadership. The violence was gone. The import companies remained and ran cleanly. Cassia's thesis had been accepted for publication. Her supervisor called it groundbreaking. She called Yemi in London immediately and talked for 2 hours. They had been living in each other's lives openly for 3 months. He drove her to campus on Tuesday mornings sometimes. She kept a spare notebook at his apartment because she always forgot one when she stayed. He had learned the name of every character in the documentary series she watched on weekend evenings. She had learned that he took his coffee without sugar and went completely silent when he was thinking hard about something, and that the stillness that frightened other people was simply how he lived inside himself. She knew him. He knew her. The knowing was complete and real. On a Saturday evening in April, he took her to the rooftop of a building he owned in a quiet part of the city. No operational significance. Just a rooftop with a clear view of Seoul at night and 2 chairs and the particular silence of a city that was always moving but occasionally, from the right height, seemed to pause. They sat for a while without talking. She had her notebook in her lap but was not writing. She was looking out at the lights. He watched her. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Cassia," he said. She turned to look at him. He was not on one knee. He was simply turned toward her in his chair, completely still, completely present, with a small box open in his hand and every wall he had ever built entirely, irreversibly down. Inside the box was a ring. Simple. Clean. A single stone catching the city light. "I covered a blind date for my oldest friend and walked into that restaurant expecting nothing," he said quietly. "You sat down across from me and treated me like an ordinary man, and I have wanted to be nothing else since." He held her gaze without flinching. "Stay with me. Not because you are safe here, though you are. Because you choose to." Cassia looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at the city spread out behind him. The city she had come to alone 3 years ago with a leather notebook and a scholarship and a promise made at a hospital bedside when she was 12 years old. The city where she had mapped criminal empires and fallen in love with the man who ran one. Completely, with full knowledge and open eyes. She reached out and took the ring from the box herself. She slid it onto her own finger and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I choose to," she said. He let out a breath that had been held for months. He took her hand, the one wearing the ring, and held it with the quiet, complete certainty of a man who had found the one thing in the world he had no intention of ever letting go. The city glittered below them. Seoul moved on, brilliant and indifferent and entirely unaware that on a quiet rooftop somewhere above its noise, the most feared man in its underground had become, finally and completely, simply a man in love. She chose him with open eyes. He chose her over everything he built. That is what real love looks like. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, drop your favorite moment in the comments, and share this with someone who needs a story like this today. Subscribe and turn on notifications because there are more stories coming, and you do not want to miss a single one.